On August 14, 2019, the Lockwood family loaded their silver Chevrolet Suburban with enough luggage for a 5-day visit and drove into the Canadian wilderness. 5 people entered that truck in Dawson City. 2 years later, only one would emerge, alive, alone, and carrying stories no one wanted to believe.
I'm Lukas, and this is Lost Files. We tell the stories that mainstream media ignores. The disappearances, the mysteries, the cases that deserve more attention. If you know a story that needs to be heard, drop it in the form linked below. And if this one stuck with you, subscribe and let me know your thoughts in the comments.
Clara Lockwood had been missing for 762 days when Royal Canadian Mounted Police found her living in a cabin that should have been empty, surrounded by 312 locked journals. Each journal contained a piece of what had happened to her family. Each lock had to be cut to reveal what lay inside, and what lay inside changed everything investigators thought they knew about disappearances in the North. This is not a story about getting lost in the wilderness. This is a story about being found by someone who never intended to let you leave. The Lockwood family wasn't supposed to be extraordinary. Martin Lockwood, 47, was a heavy equipment operator who worked the oil fields near Anchorage when the season was right and fixed small engines in his garage when it wasn't. His hands were permanently stained with motor oil, and he had a laugh that neighbors heard through the walls of their duplex apartment. Diane, 44, managed the front desk at a veterinary clinic and collected ceramic owls, not because she particularly loved owls, but because once people knew you collected something, they never stopped bringing you more of it. She had 43 ceramic owls by the time she disappeared. Their children moved through the world with the casual confidence of kids who'd been raised to believe their parents could fix anything. Ethan, 19, was taking a gap year before community college, working construction during the summer, and spending his earnings on a motorcycle he was rebuilding in the apartment building's parking lot. Clara, 16, wrote poetry in the margins of her textbooks and had convinced herself she wanted to study marine biology, though she'd never seen an ocean. Sophie, 11, spoke to every dog she encountered as if it were a personal friend and could whistle louder than seemed physically possible for someone her size. They were visiting Diane's mother, Nora, in Dawson City. The same trip they made every August, driving the Alaska Highway in their aging Suburban, while Diane complained about the air conditioning and the kids fought over radio stations. Nora Pellerin was 81 and lived alone in a house that smelled like lavender, soap, and old wood, with a garden that produced more zucchini than 3 families could reasonably consume. The visits followed the same pattern every year. 2 days of Nora cooking enormous meals while catching up on a year's worth of family news, 1 day of obligatory sightseeing around Dawson City's tourist attractions, and 2 days of Diane trying to convince her mother to move closer to civilization, while Nora politely but firmly refused. August 14th was departure day. Nora had packed enough sandwiches for the 8-hour drive to Anchorage and pressed a baggie of homemade cookies into each grandchild's hands. She'd hugged them longer than usual, Clara would later remember, longer than previous years, as if she sensed something her granddaughter couldn't name. The Suburban pulled away from Nora's house at 11:17 in the morning. A neighbor, Mrs. Corbin, waved from her front porch as they drove past. She'd watched the same scene every August for 7 years. The silver truck loaded with luggage, Diane in the passenger seat already consulting a map, Martin adjusting his rearview mirror, the kids visible through the back windows, Sophie pressed against the glass making faces, Ethan wearing headphones, Clara reading a paperback novel with a cracked spine. Mrs. Corbin went inside to start her own lunch. She never saw the Lockwood family again. The Alaska Highway stretches nearly 1,500 miles through some of the most isolated terrain in North America. It was built in 1942 as a military supply route, carved through wilderness that hadn't asked to be connected to anywhere else. The road passes through communities separated by hundreds of miles of forest, mountain ranges, and silence so complete it feels like a physical presence. Cell service along the highway exists in pockets, brief moments of connectivity between vast stretches where phones become expensive paperweights. Most travelers know this. They plan accordingly, checking their vehicles before departure, carrying emergency supplies, informing people of their intended route and arrival time. Martin had made this drive enough times to know its rhythms. He'd called his supervisor in Anchorage that morning to confirm his return to work on Monday. He'd filled the Suburban's gas tank and checked the oil. Diane had texted her sister around noon. "Leaving Dawson now. Home for dinner tomorrow." The message was delivered successfully. The last electronic trace of the Lockwood family came at 3:47 p.m. when Martin's cell phone pinged a tower near Destruction Bay, a small community roughly halfway between Dawson City and Anchorage. The signal lasted 4 minutes, long enough for the phone to attempt delivery of a software update that would never complete. After that, nothing. No more pings, no credit card transactions, no calls to family or friends. The Lockwood family had entered the kind of silence that in retrospect feels ominous, but at the time would have seemed perfectly normal. They were driving through wilderness. Of course, their phones weren't working. When the family failed to arrive in Anchorage on August 15th, Diane's sister, Janet, wasn't immediately concerned. The Alaska highway was unpredictable. Weather could force delays. Vehicle trouble could add hours to the journey. She waited until evening before calling Nora in Dawson City. "They left yesterday morning," Nora confirmed. "Right on time. Diane said they'd be home for dinner." Janet called Martin's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. She called Diane's. Same result. She tried Ethan's number, then Clara's. 4 voicemails, each one sounding slightly more strained than the last. By 10 p.m., Janet was pacing her living room, alternating between calling her sister's phone and searching online for news of accidents or road closures. She found nothing. The Alaska highway had been clear. No weather delays, no reported incidents. At 11:30 p.m., she called the RCMP. Constable Dennis Holgate took the initial missing persons report from Janet while sitting in his patrol car outside of Tim Hortons in Whitehorse. He'd worked the Yukon Territory for 9 years and had fielded dozens of similar calls. Families overdue from highway trips, almost always with innocent explanations. Dead cell phone batteries, unexpected overnight stops, mechanical problems in areas without immediate service. "Vehicle description?" Holgate asked, typing with 2 fingers on his laptop. "Silver Chevrolet Suburban. I don't know the year. Maybe 2008, 2009? License plate?" Janet provided the Alaska plate number she'd written down from previous visits. "Last known location?" "They left Dawson City yesterday morning. They were driving home to Anchorage." Holgate entered the information into the system and noted the file for follow-up. In most cases, the family would turn up within 24 hours with an embarrassed explanation and apologies for causing worry. He'd call again in the morning if they hadn't surfaced, but the Lockwoods didn't surface. August 16th passed with no word, no sightings, no contact. Janet called the RCMP 3 more times. Martin's supervisor called twice. Diane's co-workers at the veterinary clinic began to worry. On August 17th, 72 hours after the family was last seen, the RCMP launched a formal search and rescue operation. The search began with the obvious, retracing the family's intended route along the Alaska highway. RCMP officers drove the entire stretch from Dawson City to Anchorage, stopping at every gas station, restaurant, and lodge to show photographs of the Lockwood family in their silver Suburban. "Haven't seen them," was the consistent response. Gas station attendants shook their heads. Restaurant servers looked at the photos with the polite attention of people who see hundreds of travelers every week. Lodge owners checked their registration books and found no record of the Lockwoods. Search teams expanded their scope. Helicopters swept the highway corridor looking for vehicles that might have left the road. Ground teams hiked accessible areas where a family might have stopped to rest or sightsee. Divers checked bodies of water near the highway, though there was no reason to believe the Suburban had entered water. On August 19th, 5 days after the disappearance, a helicopter crew spotted something metallic glinting through the trees near Kluane Lake, roughly 60 kilometers from where Martin's phone had last pinged. Kluane Lake is the largest lake in Yukon Territory, nearly 70 kilometers long, surrounded by mountains and forests that have remained essentially unchanged since the retreat of the glaciers. The lake's shores are accessible by a handful of rough roads that branch off the Alaska highway, leading to fishing spots and camping areas used by tourists willing to drive on gravel and risk getting stuck. The helicopter crew marked GPS coordinates and radioed ground teams. Constable Holgate was among the officers who drove the winding gravel road to reach the sighting location. The road hadn't been maintained recently. Potholes and washouts forced them to drive slowly, carefully, wondering how anyone would have ended up here. They found the Suburban parked in a small clearing overlooking the lake, roughly 200 meters from the main road. The vehicle was positioned as if someone had pulled over to admire the view, though the clearing was barely visible from the highway and would have required deliberate effort to locate. Holgate approached the vehicle with his hand near his service weapon, though he couldn't have explained why. The Suburban's doors stood open, all four of them, as if the family had exited quickly or been ordered to exit. The front seats were pushed back, suggesting the driver and passenger had gotten out normally rather than being pulled from the vehicle. Luggage remained in the back, neatly arranged and apparently undisturbed. Diane's purse sat on the front seat. Wallet intact, cash and credit cards untouched. Martin's cell phone was wedged between the driver's seat cushions, its battery dead. A half-eaten bag of beef jerky sat on the center console, the package carefully folded to preserve freshness. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of violence or panic. The scene looked more like a family had stopped for a picnic and simply forgotten to close the doors when they left. But they hadn't left. Or if they had, they'd left everything behind. Luggage, identification, money, medication. Diane's purse contained her insulin pen and glucose monitor. She was diabetic and required daily injections. She wouldn't have voluntarily separated from her medical supplies. Search teams established a command post in the clearing and began expanding their search radius. If the family had left the vehicle voluntarily, they couldn't have gone far on foot, especially with 11-year-old Sophie and Diane's medical condition. Searchers worked in grids, covering every accessible area within a 10-kilometer radius of the abandoned Suburban. They found hiking trails that led nowhere, old hunting camps long abandoned, creek beds that might have provided water for someone trying to survive in the wilderness. They found no trace of the Lockwood family. Dive teams searched Cluane Lake, focusing on areas near the shore where someone might have entered the water. The lake was deep and cold, water temperatures that would incapacitate an adult within minutes. They found nothing. Dog teams trained in tracking missing persons were flown in from Vancouver. The dogs showed initial interest around the Suburban, picking up scents that led them roughly 50 meters into the forest before the trail vanished. It was as if the family had simply stopped existing at that point. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, the operation shifted from rescue to recovery. The official assumption was that the family had encountered some form of mishap, possibly becoming lost in the wilderness and succumbing to exposure, though their remains had yet to be located. The case was transferred to the RCMP's Major Crimes Unit. Detective Sergeant Lydia Rousseau inherited the file and the frustrating task of investigating a disappearance that made no logical sense. Rousseau had worked missing persons cases for 12 years. She'd seen families vanish due to domestic violence, murder-suicides, witness protection relocations, and voluntary disappearances designed to escape debt or criminal charges. She'd also worked cases where families had simply made fatal errors in judgment, taking inadequate supplies into harsh terrain, underestimating weather conditions, or suffering medical emergencies in locations too remote for help to arrive in time. The Lockwood case fit none of these patterns. There was no evidence of family discord, no financial pressures that might motivate a voluntary disappearance, no criminal history that might attract enemies. Medical records confirmed that Diane's diabetes was well controlled and unlikely to cause a sudden emergency. The family had adequate supplies for their planned journey and had demonstrated competence on previous highway trips. "It's like they evaporated," Rousseau told her supervisor during a case review 6 months after the disappearance. 5 people don't just disappear without leaving some trace, but apparently they could. The investigation continued for 18 months, generating hundreds of pages of reports, interviews, and forensic analysis. Every lead was pursued. Every theory was examined. The results were consistently negative. Family and friends were interviewed multiple times. Everyone described the Lockwoods as a close, stable family with no enemies and no reason to disappear voluntarily. Martin's financial records showed no unusual transactions. Diane's medical records revealed no undisclosed health crises. The children's school and social media accounts contained nothing suspicious. The abandoned Suburban was transported to an RCMP forensics facility and examined in microscopic detail. Fingerprints belonged to family members and a few unidentified prints that likely came from previous owners or mechanics. No foreign DNA was detected. No signs of damage or tampering were found. Investigators explored increasingly remote possibilities. Had the family encountered a violent criminal who left no trace? Had they been abducted by human traffickers, though no ransom demand ever materialized? Had they stumbled upon illegal activity and been silenced? Each theory led nowhere. The case went cold in early 2021, though it was never officially closed. Rousseau kept the file on her desk and continued to review it periodically, hoping fresh perspective might reveal something she'd missed. She'd developed the kind of professional obsession that comes from cases that refuse to make sense. Then, on October 3rd, 2021, her phone rang at 6:15 in the morning. "Detective Rousseau? This is Constable Perry in Watson Lake. We've got a situation here that might connect to your missing family from a couple years back." "The Lockwoods?" Rousseau was instantly alert. "What kind of situation?" "Wildlife surveyor found smoke coming from a cabin about 80 kilometers northeast of Cluane Lake. Remote area, supposed to be vacant. When our officers checked it out, they found a young woman living alone. Says her name is Clara Lockwood." Rousseau felt something shift in her chest, not quite relief, not quite dread. "Condition? Malnourished but alert. Doesn't seem to be in immediate medical danger. But here's the thing, Detective. The cabin is full of journals, hundreds of them, all locked. She says if we want to know what happened to her family, we have to read them in order." The cabin where Clara Lockwood had lived for 26 months sat in a clearing that would have been invisible from any road or aircraft unless someone knew exactly where to look. It was a single-room structure, roughly 12 by 16 feet, built from local timber and designed for minimal maintenance. A wood stove provided heat. Solar panels charged a single battery that powered LED lights. Water came from a hand-pumped well. An outhouse stood 20 meters away, screened by spruce trees. Inside, journals covered every available surface. They were stacked on makeshift shelves constructed from boards and cinder blocks. They lined the walls in neat rows, organized with the precision of a library catalog system. They filled boxes under the narrow cot where Clara had slept. Each journal was bound in the same style, composition books with black and white covers, the kind sold in grocery stores and pharmacies across Canada. Each was secured with a small padlock. Clara had numbered them. Journal 1 through Journal 312. 762 days of captivity, documentation, and survival, recorded in handwriting that grew progressively more erratic as the months passed but never became illegible. When RCMP officers first entered the cabin, Clara was sitting cross-legged on her cot, holding Journal 312 in her lap. She looked up at them with the calm expression of someone who had been expecting this moment for a very long time. "You'll need to read them in order," she said, as if continuing a conversation that had been interrupted rather than starting a new one. "It won't make sense otherwise." Constable Amy Perry, who had been first on scene, would later describe Clara's demeanor as unnervingly composed. She appeared physically weak, underweight, with the pallor of someone who hadn't seen adequate sunlight but mentally sharp. She answered questions directly and showed no signs of confusion or delusional thinking. "Where are your parents, Clara?" "Dead." "Your siblings?" "Sophie is dead." "Ethan..." Clara paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "Ethan left with Harlan. I don't know where they are now." "Who is Harlan?" "Read the journals. Start with number 1, everything is in there." Clara was transported to a hospital in Whitehorse for medical evaluation while RCMP investigators secured the cabin as a crime scene. Bolt cutters were brought in to remove the padlocks from the journals. The first journal was opened at 4:30 p.m. on October 3, 2021. The opening entry was dated August 14, 2019, the day the Lockwood family disappeared. Day 1. The car made a noise Dad didn't like about an hour after we left the lake. He pulled over to look under the hood. That's when Harlan showed up. He seemed nice. Said he lived nearby and could help us get the car fixed. Dad was suspicious at first, but what choice did we have? We were in the middle of nowhere, and Sophie was getting scared. Harlan's cabin isn't far from where we broke down. It's bigger than it looks from outside, clean, organized. He has tools and says he knows about engines. Mom thinks we'll be back on the road tomorrow. Dad isn't so sure. I don't like how Harlan looks at us. Not in a creepy way exactly. More like he's adding us up, figuring out something we don't understand yet. Sophie likes him because he gave her hot chocolate and let her pet his dog, a big German shepherd named Bear. Ethan thinks he's okay. Mom and Dad are being polite, but careful. We're staying here tonight. Harlan says the nearest mechanic is in Destruction Bay and they're closed until morning. He's probably right, but something feels off. I can't explain what. If I'm going to keep track of this, I need to write everything down, just in case. Detective Sergeant Rousseau arrived at the cabin on October 4th to personally oversee the journal examination. She'd driven through the night from Whitehorse, fueled by caffeine, and the kind of nervous energy that comes from finally getting answers to questions that had haunted her for 2 years. The cabin felt smaller in person than she'd expected from the photographs. 312 journals created a maze of paper and metal locks, transforming the single room into something that looked more like an archive than a living space. Clara had created her own system of organization. Journals arranged chronologically, with subcategories for different types of content. Some journals contained daily entries. Others focused on specific events or conversations. A few appeared to be transcripts of things Clara had overheard or been told by other people. She's been documenting everything, Rousseau told her team. This isn't just a diary, it's evidence. She's been building a case. Reading the journals in order revealed a story that began ordinarily and descended into something that defied belief. The Lockwood family's car trouble had been legitimate. A cracked radiator hose that left them stranded on a gravel road with no cell service and limited options. Harlan's offer of help had been their only practical choice. But Harlan, it became clear from Clara's meticulous documentation, had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. Harlan Deschamps was 63 years old and had lived alone in the Canadian wilderness for most of the past 2 decades. According to Clara's journals, he'd purchased his remote property in 2001 using cash from the sale of a trucking company he'd operated in Alberta. He'd built the cabin himself, installed solar panels and a water system, and created what he described as a place where people could think clearly. Clara's early entries described him as soft-spoken and knowledgeable about wilderness survival. He knew which plants were edible, how to preserve meat without refrigeration, how to predict weather changes by reading cloud formations. He seemed genuinely helpful during the family's first day at his cabin, working on Martin's radiator hose and explaining that replacement parts would need to be ordered from Whitehorse. Day 3. Harlan says the part won't arrive until Monday. Dad is frustrated but trying not to show it. Mom is worried about missing work. She needs to call her boss, but there's no phone service here, and Harlan doesn't have a landline. Harlan keeps saying we're welcome to stay as long as needed. He has plenty of food, he says, plenty of space. He seems happy to have company, like he doesn't get visitors very often. Sophie has been following him around, asking questions about everything. He's patient with her, showing her how to identify animal tracks and which berries are safe to eat. She thinks he's like a character from one of her adventure books. I wish I felt the same way. There's something about the way he watches us when he thinks we're not looking, and his stories don't always add up. Yesterday, he said he'd been here 20 years. Today, he said 15. Small things, but they bother me. Asterisk. The journals revealed that Harlan's helpful demeanor had been deliberate misdirection. While appearing to work on the family's vehicle, he'd systematically disabled other components, puncturing the spare tire, loosening battery cables, removing the alternator belt. Each act of sabotage was designed to look like normal wear or coincidental failure. Clara had noticed these discrepancies but hadn't understood their significance at the time. Her journal entries tracked her growing unease as their intended overnight stay stretched into days, then weeks. Day 8. Dad found the spare tire this morning, completely flat. Harlan says it must have been damaged when we drove off the main road, hitting rocks or something. He offered to patch it, but says we need a special kit that he doesn't have. I'm starting to think Harlan doesn't want us to leave. Not in an obvious way, but every time Dad suggests we should walk to the highway for help, Harlan has a reason why that's dangerous. Bears, weather, getting lost. He always sounds reasonable. Ethan is getting restless. He keeps talking about hiking out on his own, but Mom won't hear of it. She's right, it's too risky. But staying here feels risky too in a way I can't explain. The turning point came on day 11, when Martin Lockwood discovered that their vehicle's engine block had been deliberately punctured with a metal rod. The damage was extensive and clearly intentional. When confronted, Harlan's helpful facade finally dropped. Clara's journal entry from that day was written in different handwriting, shaky, rushed, frightened. Day 11, Dad found what Harlan did to the engine. We all heard them arguing. Harlan didn't deny it. He said we belonged here now, said the outside world was poison and he was protecting us from it. Dad tried to fight him. Harlan had a rifle. Mom screamed. Sophie started crying. Ethan grabbed Sophie and ran toward the woods. Harlan shot Dad in the leg. Not to kill him, he said, just to make a point. Dad is bleeding but conscious. Harlan bandaged him up afterward like nothing happened. We're not guests anymore. We're prisoners. What followed was a carefully orchestrated psychological campaign designed to break the family's resistance and remake them according to Harlan's vision. He separated them physically. Martin and Diane were confined to a storage shed behind the cabin while the children remained in the main house under Harlan's direct supervision. Harlan's philosophy, as recorded in Clara's journals, centered on his belief that modern society was corrupt and destructive. He saw himself as a savior, rescuing people from lives of meaningless consumption and spiritual emptiness. The Lockwood family, he explained, had been chosen to join his community of the pure. Day 18. Harlan talks for hours about his plans. He's going to teach us to live without the poison of civilization. No more processed food, no more television, no more schools filling our heads with lies. We'll learn what humans were supposed to be before society ruined us. He says Mom and Dad will understand eventually, that they'll thank him for saving us from wasting our lives in the city. He talks about Sophie like she's his own daughter, about how innocent she is, how much potential she has. I pretend to listen and agree. It's the only way to keep him calm. But I write everything down when he's not watching. Someone needs to know what really happened here. Asterisk. The journals documented escalating control and psychological manipulation. Harlan rationed food to maintain dependency, used isolation to prevent planning, and employed a system of rewards and punishments to encourage compliance. Family members who resisted faced reduced meals or separation from loved ones. Those who seemed to accept their situation received better treatment and small privileges. Clara adapted to captivity by becoming Harlan's apparent confidant while secretly maintaining her role as family chronicler. She convinced him that she was interested in his philosophy and wanted to learn from him. This deception gave her access to information and relative freedom within the cabin. Day 34. Harlan trusts me now. He lets me help with cooking and cleaning. He explains his theories about society and corruption. I nod and ask questions like I'm really interested. The truth is, he's not stupid. Some of what he says makes sense about people working jobs they hate and buying things they don't need, but he uses reasonable ideas to justify insane behavior. He thinks kidnapping us was a form of rescue. Sophie is adapting too well. She started calling him Uncle Harlan. She seems to have forgotten that we're prisoners here. Maybe that's better for her. Maybe fighting it would just make things worse. The family's resistance collapsed gradually under the weight of isolation and psychological pressure. Martin's leg wound became infected. requiring medical attention that Harlan provided conditionally. Diane's diabetes created another vulnerability, insulin that could be rationed or withheld. Ethan, the eldest child, posed the greatest threat to Harlan's control and received the harshest treatment. Clara's journals detailed his multiple escape attempts and the increasingly severe punishments that followed. Day 67. Ethan tried to run again last night, made it almost 2 miles before Harlan tracked him down with the dog. When they brought him back, Harlan chained him to a tree and left him there for 18 hours. No food, no water. Mom was hysterical. Harlan says Ethan has to choose, accept his place in the community or be removed from it. I think I know what that means. Ethan is different now, quieter. Sometimes I catch him staring at nothing like he's not really here anymore. I'm scared he's going to do something desperate. The crisis came during the family's 4th month of captivity. Martin Lockwood's infected wound had progressed to sepsis, requiring immediate medical intervention. When Harlan refused to provide proper care, claiming that modern medicine was part of the corruption they were escaping, Diane made a desperate attempt to carry her husband to the highway. They were caught within hours. Clara's journal entry from October 21, 2019, was brief and devastating. Day 68. Dad died this morning. The infection was too much. Mom is broken. She just sits and stares at his body. Harlan says it was God's will, that Dad couldn't let go of his old life, and this was the consequence. He's planning some kind of ceremony to release Dad's spirit and help the rest of us move forward. I don't think I can pretend anymore. I don't think any of us can. Diane Lockwood's death followed 3 weeks later. According to Clara's journals, she'd stopped eating after her husband's death, essentially willing herself to die. Harlan had alternated between forced feeding and philosophical lectures about accepting loss, but nothing could restore her will to live. Day 89. Mom died in her sleep. I think she wanted to. I think she couldn't stand being here without Dad. Harlan buried her next to Dad behind the cabin. He made Sophie and me attend the ceremony. He talked about how death was a transition, not an ending, and how Mom and Dad were free now from the suffering of their old lives. Sophie cried through the whole thing. Afterward, Harlan held her and told her that he would take care of us now, that we were his family. I wanted to kill him. I fantasized about finding his rifle and shooting him while he slept. But then what? Sophie and Ethan and I would still be trapped here, with winter coming and no way to survive on our own. So I keep writing, I keep pretending, and I keep hoping that someone will find us before it's too late. The deaths of both parents marked a turning point in the family's captivity. With the adults gone, Harlan's control over the children became absolute. He moved them into the main cabin and began an intensive program of what he called purification, elimination of all connections to their previous lives. Clara's journals from this period showed her growing desperation and her siblings' psychological deterioration. Sophie, at 11 years old, began exhibiting signs of Stockholm Syndrome, genuinely believing that Harlan had rescued them from a bad situation. Ethan swung between periods of catatonic depression and explosive rage. Day 134. Sophie asked me today why Mom and Dad had to die. I started to explain that Harlan killed them, that this isn't normal, that we're prisoners here. She got upset and said I was lying, that Uncle Harlan saved us. She's been here for 4.5 months. Half of that time, our parents were dead. For her, this is starting to feel normal. She's forgetting what life was like before. Ethan isn't forgetting, but he's not fighting anymore either. He just exists, like he's waiting for something, but he doesn't know what. Asterisk. The winter of 2019 to 2020 nearly killed them all. The cabin's heating system was barely adequate for one person, let alone 4. Food supplies ran low. Harlan's solar panels provided limited power during the short daylight hours. Clara's journal entries became shorter and less frequent as paper grew scarce, and physical weakness made writing difficult. But she never stopped documenting their ordeal. Day 201. Ethan has been talking to Harlan about leaving, not escaping, leaving, like going with him somewhere. Harlan says there are other communities, other people who understand the truth about society. I think Ethan is planning something. I hope it's not what I think it is. The breaking point came in March 2020, during their 7th month of captivity. Sophie developed pneumonia, likely from prolonged exposure to cold and damp conditions. Her illness progressed rapidly, and despite Harlan's attempts at treatment using herbal remedies and folk medicine, she died on March 28th. Clara's journal entry for that day consisted of a single sentence: Day 227. Sophie is gone. The next several entries were blank pages, followed by a return to documentation written in handwriting so erratic it suggested complete psychological breakdown. Day 235. Buried Sophie next to Mom and Dad. Harlan says she was too pure for this world, that she went home to God where children belong. I want to die, I want to die, I want to die. Day 236. Ethan says he's leaving with Harlan, going to find the other communities Harlan talks about. He asked me to come with them. I said no, someone has to stay and tell the story. Someone has to remember day 237. Ethan left with Harlan this morning, took the dog, and most of the supplies. Said they would come back for me when they found a good place, said I could think about it while they were gone. Day 238. Alone now, completely alone. The cabin is so quiet, I can hear my own heartbeat. Clara Lockwood spent the next 18 months alone in the wilderness, surviving on stored food supplies, what she could forage, and an iron determination to bear witness to her family's fate. Her later journal entries showed remarkable resilience and psychological recovery, as if having a purpose, documenting the truth, had given her reason to continue living. She taught herself wilderness survival skills from books Harlan had left behind. She rationed supplies carefully. She maintained the solar panels and water system. Most importantly, she continued writing, creating a comprehensive record of everything that had happened. Day 400, 1 year and 35 days. I've been alone for 4 months now. I dream about them every night. Mom, Dad, Sophie. Sometimes I dream about Ethan too, but those dreams are different, sadder. I wonder if he's alive somewhere. If Harlan kept his word about the other communities, or if it was just another lie. I wonder if Ethan chose to go or if Harlan made him. I'm not the same person who wrote in journal number 1. That girl believed her family would be rescued, that this was temporary, that someone would come looking for us. This girl knows better. But I'm still here, I'm still writing. And someday someone will read this and know what happened to the Lockwood family. Someday there will be justice. Detective Sergeant Rousseau finished reading the final journal on October 7, 2021. 312 journals spanning 762 days of captivity, survival, and loss. The story they told was both comprehensive and devastating. A detailed account of how an ordinary family had been systematically destroyed by one man's delusional philosophy. Clara's medical evaluation had confirmed her remarkable physical and psychological condition. Despite 26 months of isolation and trauma, she showed no signs of permanent mental impairment. Her malnutrition was correctable, her wilderness-related injuries were minor, and her cognitive function remained sharp. When Rousseau interviewed her, Clara answered every question with the same calm precision that characterized her journal entries. She provided descriptions of Harlan Deschamps, details about his property and methods, and information about the location where her parents and sister were buried. "Do you have any idea where Harlan and your brother might have gone?" Rousseau asked. Clara considered this carefully. Harlan talked about communities in northern British Columbia, people who lived off the grid by choice. He said there were places where families could disappear completely if they wanted to. "Do you think your brother went willingly?" Another long pause. "I think Ethan was broken. I think when Sophie died, he couldn't handle being there anymore. Harlan offered him a way out and he took it." "Even knowing what Harlan had done to your family?" Clara's composure cracked slightly. "You have to understand, after 7 months, reality gets flexible. Harlan was very good at making his version of events seem reasonable. He convinced Sophie that our parents died because they couldn't adapt to a better way of life. Maybe he convinced Ethan of something similar." The search for Harlan Deschamps and Ethan Lockwood began immediately. RCMP officers located the cabin where the family had been held captive and confirmed Clara's account in every detail. They found 3 graves behind the cabin, exactly where she had indicated. Forensic examination confirmed the remains belonged to Martin, Diane, and Sophie Lockwood. The cabin itself became a crime scene that defied easy categorization. It contained evidence of long-term kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and 3 homicides. But it also contained signs of a functioning household, gardens, preserved food, maintenance projects, books, and educational materials. Harlan had created a space that was simultaneously prison and homestead, nightmare and sustainable community. The search for Harlan and Ethan expanded across northern Canada, focusing on remote communities and off-grid settlements. Investigators distributed photographs and descriptions to wilderness outfitters, hunting guides, and isolated trading posts. They contacted authorities in Alaska, northwestern United States, and remote areas of British Columbia. No confirmed sightings were reported. Harlan Deschamps and Ethan Lockwood had vanished into the same wilderness that had swallowed the Lockwood family 2 years earlier. Clara was released from medical care after 2 weeks and placed in the custody of her Aunt Janet, who had never stopped searching for answers about her sister's family. The reunion was captured by news cameras, but Clara refused all interview requests, speaking only through a prepared statement read by RCMP officials. "I want people to know that my family fought to survive and to stay together. They didn't disappear by choice. They were taken by someone who believed his twisted philosophy justified destroying innocent lives. My parents died trying to protect us. My sister died because she was denied medical care. My brother made a choice I hope I never have to understand." The statement continued. "I documented everything because I believed someone needed to tell the truth about what happened. 312 journals containing 762 days of evidence, every day recorded, every conversation remembered, every injustice preserved. That's my family's legacy, not their disappearance, but their refusal to be forgotten." Clara Lockwood enrolled in online high school courses and expressed interest in studying criminal justice. She granted one final interview to Detective Sergeant Rousseau 6 months after her rescue. "Do you regret not going with your brother?" "Every day. But I also know why I stayed. Someone had to remember them correctly. Someone had to write down who they really were, not just how they died." "What do you want people to understand about this case?" Clara was quiet for a long time before answering. "That evil doesn't always announce itself. Harlan seemed helpful at first. He seemed like exactly the kind of person you'd want to meet if you were stranded and scared. He saved us from one problem by creating a much worse one." She paused, then continued. "And that ordinary families can disappear completely if no one is paying attention. We were gone for 2 years before anyone found us. In that time, 3 people died and 2 more vanished. If I hadn't kept writing, if I hadn't documented everything, the truth would have disappeared with us, and the case remains officially open." Harlan Deschamps is wanted for kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and 3 counts of criminal negligence causing death. Ethan Lockwood is listed as missing, though whether he should be considered victim or accomplice remains unclear. Clara's journals have been preserved as evidence, but she has indicated that she wants portions made available to researchers studying kidnapping cases and wilderness survival. She believes her family's story might help prevent similar tragedies or aid in other investigations. 312 locked journals, each one a day in the life of a family that refused to disappear quietly. Each lock cut away to reveal truth that someone desperately wanted hidden. Each entry a small act of resistance against being forgotten, against having their story rewritten by their captor. Clara Lockwood survived 762 days of captivity by refusing to let her family become just another missing persons case. She documented their lives, their deaths, and their determination to remain themselves even in the face of systematic destruction. Somewhere in the Canadian wilderness, Harlan Deschamps may still be building his perfect community of the pure. And somewhere, Ethan Lockwood may be learning to forget who he used to be. But thanks to 312 journals and one girl's refusal to stop writing, the Lockwood family will never truly disappear. They exist now in the permanent record of truth, preserved exactly as they were, not victims of circumstance, but people who fought, loved, and remembered each other until the very end. The Alaska Highway still stretches through 1,500 miles of wilderness. Families still drive its length, trusting in their vehicles, their supplies, and their ability to reach safety. Most of them make it home. But Clara Lockwood's journals serve as a reminder that the distance between an ordinary family trip and complete disappearance can be measured in a single moment of car trouble, one offer of help from a stranger, and the terrible vulnerability of trusting someone who has been waiting patiently for exactly that trust to be offered. The journals are locked away now in an RCMP evidence facility, but their contents remain, a testament written in ballpoint pen and desperation, proving that even in the darkest circumstances, someone was watching, someone was remembering, and someone refused to let the truth disappear into the wilderness silence. 312 journals, 762 days, one family's refusal to be forgotten. That's how Clara Lockwood brought her family home.